The clock on the restaurant wall showed 9:30 p.m., and Lisa's feet were already screaming for mercy. She had been running around Romano's Italian kitchen for nearly 10 hours straight, carrying heavy trays and forcing smiles even when customers treated her like she was invisible. This was her third double shift this week, and exhaustion was starting to show in the dark circles under her eyes. At 22 years old, Lisa had bigger dreams than most people knew. Every night after work, she would go home to her tiny studio, apartment, and practice piano on an old digital keyboard she had bought from a garage sale for $50. The keys were slightly loose, and some of them didn't make any sound at all, but it was all she could afford. Her neighbors probably thought she was crazy, playing music until 2 in the morning, but they didn't understand what music meant to her. Growing up, Lisa's family never had money for piano lessons. Her mom worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, and her dad left when she was 12. Music became her escape from a world that often felt too heavy for a young girl to carry. She taught herself to read music by watching YouTube videos and checking out library books that were falling apart from being handled so many times. The dream that kept her going was getting into one of the big music schools she had her eye on, a conservatory in New York, but the application fee alone was more money than she made in 2 weeks of waiting tables. Every tip she earned went into a coffee can hidden in her closet, slowly growing toward that impossible goal. Romano's was the kind of place where rich people came to show off. The walls were covered in expensive artwork, and the tables were set with real crystal glasses that probably cost more than Lisa's monthly rent. She had been working there for about 4 months, ever since her old job at the diner downtown closed. Because they couldn't pay their bills. The tips were better at Romano's, but dealing with wealthy customers was like walking through a minefield. Some were kind and generous, but others treated the staff like they were servants in some old movie. Lisa had learned to keep her head down and her mouth shut, no matter how rude people got. She needed this job too much to risk losing it. Tonight was particularly busy because it was Friday, and all the important business people in town liked to come here for their fancy dinners. Lisa had been assigned to the back section of the restaurant, where the most expensive tables were located. This area had the best view of the city lights through the big windows, and it was also where they kept the beautiful black piano that no one ever played. That piano was like a magnet for Lisa's eyes. Every time she walked past it, she couldn't help but look. It was a real baby grand, probably worth more than most people's cars. The black surface was so shiny she could see her reflection in it, and she often wondered what it would feel like to run her fingers across those perfect keys. The restaurant owner had told her the piano was just for decoration now. Apparently, they used to have someone come in and play dinner music, but that was years ago. Now it just sat there looking beautiful and untouched, like a museum piece that no one was allowed to enjoy. Lisa had always been curious about what that piano would sound like. At home on her cheap keyboard, she dreamed about playing on a real instrument with keys that responded properly and sounds that filled a room with rich, deep tones. Sometimes she would stand near it when no customers were around, just close enough to feel like she was part of something grand and elegant. Her manager, Tony, was a decent guy who understood that working in a restaurant was tough. He had been running Romano's for about 15 years and had seen all kinds of staff come and go. Lisa was one of his better waitresses because she was reliable and never complained. But he could tell she was different from the others. There was something in her eyes that suggested she was meant for bigger things. The busiest table in Lisa's section tonight was table 12, right next to the piano. A group of men in expensive suits had been there for over 2 hours, getting louder and more demanding as the evening went on. Their leader was a man in his 50s who wore a watch that probably cost more than Lisa made in a year. His voice carried across the restaurant as he bragged about his latest business deals and made jokes that weren't really funny. Lisa had already refilled their drinks 3 times and brought them 2 rounds of appetizers. Each time she approached the table, she felt like she was interrupting something important, even though she was just doing her job. The men barely looked at her when she spoke, treating her like a piece of furniture that happened to bring food out as she cleaned empty plates. From nearby tables, Lisa couldn't help but overhear their conversation. They were talking about money in amounts that seemed impossible to her. One man mentioned buying a boat that cost more than most people's houses. Another talked about his son's private school tuition like it was pocket change. Lisa tried not to let it bother her, but sometimes the contrast between their world and hers felt overwhelming. These men probably spent more on one dinner than she earned in a month of hard work. They lived in a completely different universe, where money was never a worry and dreams didn't have to be put on hold because of financial reality. What made it worse was how they talked about people like her. She had heard one of them make a comment about the help not being very bright, as if the staff couldn't hear or understand what was being said. It took all of her self-control not to tell them exactly what she thought about their attitude. The evening was getting late, and most of the other tables had already paid their bills and left. Lisa was looking forward to going home and practicing piano to wash away the stress of the day. Music was her therapy, the one thing that could always make her feel better, no matter how difficult work had been. As she walked past table 12 again, balancing a tray of clean glasses, her eyes automatically drifted toward the piano. For just a moment, she imagined herself sitting at that bench, her fingers dancing across those beautiful keys, playing something so amazing that everyone in the restaurant would stop what they were doing and listen. The man in the expensive watch noticed her looking at the piano and smirked. He nudged his friend and said something under his breath that made the whole table chuckle. Lisa felt her cheeks get warm with embarrassment, but she kept walking and tried to pretend she hadn't heard anything. She had no idea that this moment of innocent daydreaming was about to change her life forever. Sometimes the biggest opportunities come disguised as the worst situations, and tonight was going to teach Lisa that lesson in the most unexpected way possible. The restaurant was starting to empty out, but the men at table 12 showed no signs of leaving. They ordered another round of drinks and seemed to be settling in for a long night of business talk and showing off. Lisa prepared herself for at least another hour of dealing with their demands and attitude. Little did she know that within the next few minutes, her hidden talent would be put to the ultimate test in front of an audience she never would have chosen for herself. The trouble started when Lisa was clearing the dessert plates from table 12. She had been extra careful all evening, knowing how demanding these customers were. But as she reached across the table to collect the last plate, her elbow accidentally knocked over a water glass. The cold water splashed across the table, soaking some business papers that were spread out between the men. "Watch what you're doing," the man in the expensive watch shouted, jumping up from his chair. His face turned red with anger as he grabbed the wet papers and shook them off. "These documents are worth more than you make in a year, and now look at them." Lisa felt her heart sink into her stomach. "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me get some towels right away and help clean this up." She rushed to get napkins from the nearby station, her hands shaking as she tried to soak up the water. The other customers in the restaurant were starting to stare, and she could feel her face burning with embarrassment. "Sorry doesn't fix anything," the man continued, his voice getting louder. "Do you have any idea how important these papers are? This is exactly why places like this need to hire better staff." His friends were nodding along, clearly enjoying the show he was putting on. Tony, the manager, hurried over when he heard the commotion. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm and professional. Lisa had always respected Tony because he treated his employees fairly, but she could see the stress in his eyes. Dealing with angry, wealthy customers was part of his job, but it never got easier. "Your waitress here just destroyed important business documents," the man said, waving the damp papers in the air. "I'm thinking about calling the owner and filing a complaint. This kind of carelessness is unacceptable in a restaurant of this caliber." Lisa wanted to disappear into the floor. She had worked so hard to keep this job, and now it felt like everything was falling apart because of one stupid mistake. "Please, sir, I'll pay for any damage." I can work extra shifts to make up for it." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but everyone at the table could hear the desperation in it. The man looked at her with a cruel smile, like a cat that had caught a mouse. "Oh, you'll pay for it all right. But first, let me ask you something." He gestured toward the piano in the corner. "I've been watching you stare at that piano all night, like some lovesick teenager. What's that about? Don't tell me you actually think you can play that thing." Lisa's mouth went dry. She hadn't realized her glances at the piano were so obvious. I do play a little, sir, just as a hobby." She tried to keep her voice steady, but her hands were still trembling from the water incident. "A hobby?" The man laughed, and his friends joined in. "Let me guess. You learned Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on some toy piano when you were a kid, and now you think you're the next Mozart." The mockery in his voice was like a knife cutting through Lisa's pride. One of his friends leaned forward with interest. "Come on, Richard, leave the girl alone. She's had enough embarrassment for one night." But Richard wasn't finished. He was clearly enjoying having an audience and someone to look down on. No, this is actually perfect," Richard said, his eyes lighting up with a mean idea. "Since you seem so fascinated by that piano, why don't we make this interesting? I'll give you a chance to make up for your little accident and maybe even earn some extra money." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. Nothing good ever came from deals with men like this, but she was too curious and too desperate to walk away. "What do you mean, sir?" Richard stood up and walked over to the piano, running his hand along its polished surface. "This beautiful instrument has been sitting here unused for years. It's a shame, really. So here's my proposal." He turned back to face Lisa with that same cruel smile. "I'll bet you $500 that you can't play anything more complicated than Happy Birthday on this piano." The restaurant had gotten very quiet. Other diners were pretending to eat while obviously listening to every word. Lisa could see Tony watching nervously from behind the bar, probably wondering if he should step in and stop this whole situation. "But here's the catch," Richard continued, clearly enjoying the attention. "When you fail, and trust me, you will fail, you have to do something for me. You have to stand up in front of everyone here and admit that you're just a small-town dreamer who doesn't belong in a place like this. You'll apologize for wasting everyone's time with your silly fantasies." His friends looked uncomfortable now. Even they could see that Richard was being unnecessarily cruel. One of them tried to change the subject. "Richard, maybe we should just pay the bill and leave. It's getting late." But Richard was on a roll. $500, girl. That's probably more than you make in a month of carrying plates around. All you have to do is sit down at that piano and prove you're not just another dreamer with her head in the clouds. Lisa's mind was racing. $500 would be enough to pay her rent for 2 months and still have money left over for her music school application. But if she failed, the humiliation would be unbearable. She would have to stand in front of all these people and basically admit that she was nothing. "What if I can play something complicated?" Lisa asked quietly. "What happens then?" Richard laughed again. "That's not going to happen, sweetheart. But if by some miracle you manage to play something that actually sounds like music, then I'll pay you the $500, and we'll call it even on the water incident." Lisa looked around the restaurant. About 20 people were watching this unfold, including the kitchen staff who had come out to see what all the noise was about. She thought about her broken keyboard at home, the coffee can full of tips, and her dream of attending music school. This could be her chance, or it could be the most embarrassing moment of her life. "Make it $1,000, Lisa said suddenly, surprising herself with her own boldness. "If I can play something that impresses everyone here, you pay me $1,000. But if I fail, I'll not only apologize like you said, I'll also work for free for the rest of the month to make up for the water damage." Richard's eyebrows shot up. He hadn't expected her to counter his offer, let alone raise the stakes. His friends were shaking their heads, trying to signal him to back down, but his pride wouldn't let him. You've got guts, I'll give you that. Fine, $1,000 it is. The two of them shook hands, and Lisa felt like she had just signed her own death warrant. She had never played in front of an audience this big, and certainly never on a piano this expensive. But something deep inside her was tired of being looked down on, tired of being treated like she didn't matter. As word spread through the restaurant about the bet, more people gathered around to watch. Lisa realized there was no backing out now, even if she wanted to. In the next few minutes, she would either prove that her dreams were worth something, or she would learn a very painful lesson about knowing her place in the world. Lisa stood frozen in the middle of the restaurant, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The deal was made, hands were shaken, and now everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. She looked around at all the faces, staring at her, some curious, some pitying, and some clearly expecting her to fail. Richard was already settling back into his chair with a satisfied grin, like he had just won a game before it even started. His friends were whispering among themselves, probably talking about how this poor waitress was about to embarrass herself in front of everyone. The other customers in the restaurant had stopped eating and were watching the drama unfold like it was a movie. Tony walked over to Lisa and put his hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I can ask them to leave if they're causing trouble. We'll figure out another way to handle the water situation." Lisa appreciated Tony's kindness, but she knew running away wouldn't solve anything. Word would spread that she had backed down from the challenge, and she would always wonder what might have happened if she had been brave enough to try. "It's okay, Tony. I need to do this." "Are you sure you can actually play?" Tony asked, his voice full of concern. "I mean, I know you're a good waitress, but this is different. These people, they're not going to be forgiving if things go wrong." Lisa took a deep breath and looked at the beautiful black piano sitting in the corner. "I've been playing since I was 8 years old. I taught myself, and I practice every single day. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I know what I can do." Tony nodded. Slowly, he had worked with Lisa for months and had never seen her lie or exaggerate about anything. If she said she could play, maybe she really could. "All right then. But remember, no matter what happens, you still have a job here." As Lisa walked toward the piano, her legs felt like they were made of jelly. Each step seemed to take forever, and she could feel everyone's eyes following her movement. The piano looked even more intimidating up close, its shiny surface reflecting the restaurant's elegant lighting. She had dreamed about playing the piano like this countless times, but never under circumstances like these. In her dreams, she was performing for people who wanted to hear music, not for people who expected her to fail. The pressure was crushing, but she tried to push those thoughts away and focus on what she knew how to do. Richard called out from his table, "Take your time. Sweetheart, we're not going anywhere." His voice was dripping with fake sweetness, and Lisa could tell he was enjoying every second of her nervousness. Lisa reached the piano bench and paused for a moment. The seat was made of real leather and was more comfortable than any chair she had ever owned. She adjusted the height slightly and placed her hands on her knees, trying to calm her racing heart. The keys were beautiful, made of real ivory that had aged to a perfect cream color. She pressed one key gently, and the sound that came out was rich and pure, nothing like the electronic beeps from her keyboard at home. Even that single note sounded better than anything she had ever played before. "Well, are you going to play something or just sit there?" Richard asked impatiently. "We don't have all night." Lisa closed her eyes and tried to block out everything except the music in her head. She thought about all the hours she had spent practicing, all the songs she had learned from YouTube videos and library books. She thought about her grandmother, who had always told her that music was a gift that couldn't be taken away no matter how poor you were. She also thought about all the times people had dismissed her dreams, all the times she had been told to be realistic and stop reaching for things that were beyond her station in life. This was her chance to prove that dreams were worth something, that talent could come from anywhere. But what should she play? She had practiced hundreds of songs over the years, from simple melodies to complex classical pieces. She needed something that would clearly show her skill, something that couldn't be dismissed as beginner's luck. Her mind raced through possibilities. She could play something by Mozart, which was beautiful but might not be impressive enough for this crowd. She could try a popular song that everyone would recognize, but that might seem too simple. Or she could go with something more challenging, something that would leave no doubt about her abilities. The restaurant was getting quieter by the second. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working and were peeking out from behind the service windows. Lisa realized that this moment was about more than just winning a bet. It was about proving to herself that all those years of practice meant something. She thought about her mother, who worked 2 jobs and had never been able to afford piano lessons for her daughter. Her mom had always supported Lisa's musical dreams, even when money was tight and a keyboard seemed like an unnecessary expense. This performance would be for her too. Lisa also thought about all the other people like her, people who had big dreams but came from small places. People who were told they weren't good enough or smart enough or lucky enough to achieve something special. Maybe if she could do this, it would give them hope too. The pressure was enormous, but slowly Lisa began to feel something else growing inside her. It was a quiet confidence, built from years of dedicated practice and a deep love for music. She might be nervous, but she was also ready. She looked out at the audience one more time. Richard was checking his expensive watch, clearly getting impatient. His friends were looking at their phones, probably bored with the whole situation. The other diners were waiting politely, but she could tell some of them felt sorry for her. That's when Lisa made her decision. She wouldn't play something safe or easy. She wouldn't hold back because she was scared of failing. If she was going to do this, she was going to give it everything she had. She placed her fingers on the keys and took one final deep breath. The restaurant fell completely silent, as if everyone was holding their breath at the same time. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause, waiting for the first note. Lisa had spent her entire life preparing for this moment, even though she never knew it would come. All those nights practicing until her fingers were sore. All those dreams of playing for a real audience. All those times she had imagined what it would feel like to sit at a beautiful piano and share her music with the world. Now it was time to find out if dreams could become reality, or if Richard was right and she was just another small-town girl who didn't know her place. The next few minutes would change everything, one way or another. She pressed the first key, and the note rang out clear and true across the silent restaurant. There was no turning back now. The performance had begun, and Lisa's entire future hung in the balance of what would happen next. The first note hung in the air like a perfect crystal, pure and clear. Lisa felt the sound wash over her, and suddenly all her nervousness began to melt away. This was what she had been born to do. Her fingers found their home on the keys, and she began to play. She started with something gentle, a piece by Chopin that she had practiced 1,000 times on her old keyboard. But this piano was different. Every note responded to her touch like it was alive, creating sounds so rich and beautiful that even she was surprised. The melody flowed from her fingers as naturally as breathing. Richard had been expecting her to stumble through some basic tune, maybe Mary Had a Little Lamb, or something equally simple. But as the complex melody filled the restaurant, his confident smirk began to fade. This wasn't what he had planned for at all. The other customers stopped everything they were doing. Conversations died mid-sentence, forks were set down on plates, and even the busy sounds from the kitchen went quiet. Lisa's music was casting a spell over everyone in the room, drawing them into a world where only beauty existed. As Lisa played, she forgot about everything else. She forgot about the bet, the spilled water, and Richard's cruel words. She forgot about her sore feet and her tiny apartment and her broken keyboard at home. All that mattered was the music flowing through her and out into the world. The piece she had chosen was not an easy one. It required her fingers to dance across the keys in complex patterns, sometimes soft and gentle, sometimes strong and dramatic. Her hands moved with the grace of someone who had spent years perfecting their craft, even if that craft had been hidden from the world until now. An elderly woman at table 6 began to tear up. The music reminded her of her late husband, who used to take her to concerts when they were young. She reached for her tissue, not caring that strangers might see her crying. Music had a way of reaching into people's hearts and touching memories they thought were buried. Tony stood behind the bar, his mouth slightly open in amazement. He had known Lisa was different from other waitresses, but he had never imagined she possessed this kind of talent. He felt proud of her, like a father watching his daughter succeed against all odds. Even Richard's business friends were impressed, though they tried not to show it. They had expected to laugh at a waitress making a fool of herself, but instead they were witnessing something extraordinary. One of them leaned over to Richard and whispered, "Where did she learn to play like that?" But Richard wasn't ready to admit defeat. His pride was too big, and he had too much invested in being right about Lisa being just another dreamer. "She's probably just playing something she memorized," he said quietly to his friends. "Let's see how long she can keep this up." As if she could hear his doubt, Lisa smoothly transitioned into another piece, this one even more challenging than the first. Her fingers flew across the keys with incredible speed and precision, creating a cascade of notes that seemed to dance in the air above the piano. A young couple at table 3 stopped their argument about money and listened in wonder. The music was so beautiful that their problems suddenly seemed small and unimportant. They reached across the table and held hands for the first time in weeks. Remembering why they had fallen in love, Lisa's confidence grew with every passing moment. The piano was responding to her like an old friend, and she could feel the audience being drawn deeper into the music. She had never played for so many people before, but it felt natural and right, like this was what she had been preparing for. All her life, the kitchen staff had abandoned their work completely and were standing in the doorway, watching in amazement. Carlos, the head chef, had been working in restaurants for 30 years, but he had never seen anything like this. A waitress was giving a concert that would have been impressive in any major concert hall. As Lisa moved into the most difficult part of the piece, her face showed complete concentration. Her eyes were closed, and she swayed slightly with the rhythm of the music. This wasn't just playing notes on a piano. This was an artist pouring her soul into her craft. Richard was getting uncomfortable. His plan to humiliate Lisa was backfiring spectacularly, and he could see that everyone in the restaurant was being swept away by her performance. His friends were no longer paying attention to him at all. They were completely focused on the music. The melody became softer and more delicate, requiring Lisa to use the gentlest touch on the keys. Each note was like a drop of morning dew, perfectly formed and impossibly pure. The contrast between the powerful passages and these quiet moments showed a level of musical understanding that took years to develop. An older businessman at table 8 put down his phone for the first time all evening. He had been in the middle of closing a $1 million deal, but the music made him remember his daughter, who had wanted to study music before he convinced her to go into business instead. He wondered if he had made the right choice. Lisa began to build toward the climax of the piece, her fingers dancing across the entire range of the keyboard. The music swelled and filled every corner of the restaurant, wrapping around each listener like a warm embrace. This was the moment that would determine whether she was truly as good as she believed herself to be. The technical demands of this section were enormous. Her left hand played a complex bass pattern, while her right hand soared through a melody that required perfect timing and control. One mistake would be obvious to everyone, but Lisa's years of practice had prepared her for exactly this moment. Richard was starting to sweat. He realized that he might actually lose this bet, something he had never considered possible. Worse than losing the money was the thought of being proven wrong in front of all these people. His reputation as someone who was always right about everything was crumbling with every perfect note Lisa played. The music reached its peak. with notes cascading like a waterfall of pure sound. Lisa's entire body was involved in the performance. Now, her shoulders moving with the rhythm, her face glowing with the joy of making music. This was what happiness looked like, what it meant to be doing exactly what you were meant to do. As the piece began to wind down toward its conclusion, the restaurant remained in complete silence, except for the piano. Even the traffic outside seemed to have quieted, as if the entire world was listening to this extraordinary young woman share her gift. Lisa played the final, delicate notes with the same care a mother would use to tuck a child into bed. Each sound was exactly where it belonged, creating a perfect ending to a perfect performance. As the last note faded into silence, she opened her eyes and looked out at her audience for the first time since she had begun playing. What she saw took her breath away. Every single person in the restaurant was staring at her with expressions of pure amazement and respect. For a moment, the restaurant existed in perfect silence. Lisa sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, looking out at faces filled with wonder and disbelief. Time seemed frozen, as if the whole world was holding its breath. After witnessing something truly magical, then, slowly, one person began to clap. It was the elderly woman at table 6, the one who had been crying during the performance. Her applause was soft at first, almost hesitant, but filled with genuine emotion. Soon, others joined in, and within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in thunderous applause. People jumped to their feet, giving Lisa a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. The kitchen staff emerged completely from the back, clapping and cheering. Even the dishwashers, who barely spoke English, understood that they had just witnessed something incredible. Their faces were lit up with joy and amazement. Lisa felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling so widely her face hurt. She had never experienced anything like this moment. All those years of practicing alone in her tiny apartment, all those dreams that seemed impossible, had led to this. She stood up from the piano bench and gave a small, humble bow, which only made the crowd cheer louder. Richard sat frozen in his chair, his face pale with shock. His mouth was hanging open, and for the first time in years, he had absolutely nothing to say. His friends were clapping enthusiastically around him, but he felt completely separated from everything happening in the room. "Richard," one of his business partners said, shaking his shoulder. "Richard, did you hear that? That was incredible. Where on earth did she learn to play like that?" But Richard couldn't respond. His whole worldview had just been shattered by a waitress in a small Italian restaurant. Tony rushed over to Lisa, his eyes bright with pride and excitement. "Lisa, that was, I had no idea. That was absolutely beautiful. I've never heard anything like that in my life." He wanted to hug her, but wasn't sure if that would be appropriate. So he settled for shaking her hand enthusiastically. As the applause finally began to die down, Lisa made her way back toward Richard's table. Her legs were still shaky from the adrenaline, but she felt stronger and more confident than ever before. The crowd parted to let her through, and several people stopped her to shake her hand or tell her how amazing her performance had been. When she reached Richard's table, she stood there quietly, waiting for him to acknowledge what had just happened. His friends were looking back and forth between him and Lisa, clearly expecting him to honor his part of the deal. Finally, Richard looked up at her. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. He started, then stopped. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I was wrong about you." Lisa nodded but didn't say anything. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful response was simply to let other people find their own words. Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. With hands that trembled slightly, he counted out 10 $100 bills and placed them on the table in front of Lisa. "You won the bet fair and square. This is yours." But Lisa surprised everyone, including herself, by pushing the money back toward him. "I don't want your money," she said quietly. "I just wanted to prove that dreams are real and that talent can come from anywhere." Richard stared at the money, then back at Lisa. "But we had a deal. You earned this." Lisa shook her head. "What I earned was something much more valuable than money. I earned respect. I earned the right to believe in myself. And maybe, just maybe, I helped you understand that people aren't always what they seem to be on the surface." The other customers were still watching this exchange, fascinated by what was happening. Many of them had their phones out and had recorded parts of Lisa's performance. Within hours, videos of her playing would be shared thousands of times on social media. Richard's business partner leaned forward. "Miss, that was truly extraordinary. I have to ask, where did you study music? Which conservatory did you attend?" Lisa smiled. "I never went to music school. I taught myself everything I know. I practiced on a $50 keyboard I bought at a garage sale." The men at the table exchanged amazed glances. They had just heard a performance that would have been impressive from a graduate of the finest music schools in the world. Richard finally stood up from his chair. He was a tall man, and Lisa had to look up to meet his eyes. "I owe you more than money," he said slowly. "I owe you an apology. Not just for tonight, but for the way I've treated people like you my whole life. I thought wealth and education were the only things that mattered. I was wrong." Lisa felt her anger toward him melting away. Hurt people often hurt other people. And she could see that Richard was learning something important about himself tonight. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." Richard reached into his wallet again and pulled out a business card. "I want to help you," he said. "I know people at music schools, people who could give you opportunities. What you have is too special to be hidden away." This time, Lisa accepted what he was offering. "Thank you. I would like that very much." Tony approached the group, still beaming with pride. "Lisa, I hope you know that what happened here tonight is going to change everything. People are going to want to come here just to hear you play." Lisa laughed. "Does that mean I get to keep my day job?" "Are you kidding?" Tony said. "I'm going to hire you as our official pianist. Same money as waiting tables, but you'll be doing what you love instead of carrying heavy trays around." As word spread through the restaurant about Tony's offer, the crowd burst into applause again. Lisa felt overwhelmed by all the kindness and support surrounding her. Just a few hours ago, she had been worried about losing her job over a spilled glass of water. Now her whole life was changing. Over the next few weeks, videos of Lisa's performance went viral online. Music schools from around the country began reaching out to her, offering scholarships and opportunities she had never dreamed possible. Richard kept his promise and used his connections to open doors that had previously been closed to someone from her background. But perhaps the most important thing that happened that night was what it taught everyone who witnessed it. The elderly woman at table 6 started taking piano lessons again after 40 years. The young couple remembered what was truly important in their relationship. The businessman called his daughter and told her he was proud of her. Whatever she chose to do with her life, Lisa continued to play at Romano's every Friday and Saturday night, drawing crowds from all over the city. But she never forgot the lesson. She learned that evening that sometimes the biggest challenges in life are actually doorways to our greatest opportunities. And that dreams, no matter how impossible they seem, are always worth fighting for. Her story became an inspiration to countless people who felt like their circumstances limited their possibilities. She proved that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage to change everything.